Anybody new, you got packets and a constitution. This is our textbook. Most important book you'll ever have. Okay, tonight is on the British Bill of Rights of 1689. I'll try to talk a little bit louder, project a little bit better. The British Bill of Rights of 1689. Now, we've just gone through the Petition of Right of 1628 and the antics of Charles I, the 30-year religious war that was going on, the Civil War. Of course, Charles wanted to raise more money for his war. Parliament said no, so he disbanded Parliament. He took an army to Parliament. Of course, his army was an army of mercenaries, and Parliament responded by creating a House of Commons army to protect the parliamentarian, or to protect the Parliament, the House of Commons. The House of Lords wasn't real happy about that. Charles also took land from 7 knights under a forced loan. 7 knights said no, he threw them in prison. 5 of those knights filed writ of habeas corpus with the King's Court. Of course, it was denied. That's why we've got the writ of habeas corpus in the 3rd article of the Constitution. Another interesting thing, I was just talking with my brother on the way down here. Another thing that we have in our Constitution is that Congress, no one in Congress can be arrested going to, coming from, or while they're in session. The reason for that is our history. Charles I barged into Parliament to arrest 5 people, and those people had fled, and of course the Speaker of the House wouldn't give the people up, and so Charles left empty-handed. That's part of that history, is the reason why we have that provision within our Constitution. And there was people in Texas that actually used that, if you remember just recently. They would not come back to Texas. They stayed in Washington, D.C. so that they could not be arrested. So these things in history are important to know, because we're starting to see them play out again in this country. So the army for the House of Commons, which were patriots, the House of Commons kind of lost control of. And Charles tried to flee the country. They found Charles, and they had a trial, and they found him guilty, and they cut his head off in 1649. So we had a time of great turbulence going on in England at that time. So the British Bill of Rights, what's interesting about it is that is the last of the 5 genealogical documents that take us to the Declaration of Independence. Now, the Declaration of Independence has a preamble, and then the middle of the Declaration of Independence is a list of grievances. Those grievances come from this British Bill of Rights of 1689. In fact, even today, the British Bill of Rights of 1689 is a governing document in England. And so it's an important document. So the grievances that our founding fathers had to King George was, you have this British Bill of Rights that you've taken an oath to, no different than the oath that we have in Article 6, Section 1, Clause 3 of the Constitution. And they're saying to the king, you took this oath to protect our rights, our God-given rights, that the British Bill of Rights of 1689 protects. And so that's where those grievances come from. So there was they call it the Glorious Revolution of 1688 in England, in which it was a peaceful revolution. It wasn't a shot fired, but it was a revolution nonetheless. And this is what started and codified the constitutional monarchy that is still today in England. So we have to do just a little bit of history. And in 1689 is the first time that we've had a king and queen of England. Now remember, one of the problems with King Charles that they didn't like King Charles for is because they didn't know whether he was Protestant or whether he believed in the church of the Anglican Church of England, or whether he was Catholic. He'd married a Catholic wife. He'd helped put the Huguenots down in France. There was a Catholic terrorist attempt on the castle, and they thought that there was rumor that Charles had some hand in that. And they did not like the Catholic kings, as they believed that the Catholic kings had too much loyalty to Rome and not enough to England. So William and Mary ruled from 1689 to 1702, King of England, Scotland, and Ireland. Queen of England, Scotland, and Ireland. It's William III of Orange. His last name is Stadtholder of the United Provinces. Was born 4 November 1650, the son of William II of Orange, who died shortly before the birth, and Mary Stuart, eldest daughter of Charles I of England. So that's Mary had a brother that was raised Catholic, and he was the heir to the throne. But Mary also had an heir to the throne as well. But she was devoutly Protestant, and that's why they went to Mary first, and they said, "We want you to be queen." And she said, "As a Protestant, I will not rule over my husband." And so they made a deal with her that they would make him king and her queen if they would rule together, and she agreed. Fiercely anti-French, the future William III led the Dutch in the war against France of 1672 through 1678, following the Revolution of 1672 that revived the Stadtholderate. The future Mary II was born on 30 April 1662, the eldest daughter of James, Duke of York. James II ruled from 1685 to 1688. James fled the country. He was Catholic, and he was successful in fleeing the country when Charles was not. And his first wife, Anne Hyde. William and Mary were married on 4 November 1677 as part of the scheme of Thomas Osborne, Earl of Danby, to move England out of the French orbit and to secure the Protestant succession in the wake of York's conversion to Catholicism. At the time, Mary was second in line to the throne after her father, and William was fourth. Alarmed by political developments under James II after 1685 and determined to bring England into his anti-French alliance, William offered to invade England by April 1688 if he could be assured of the necessary support. The birth of a prince of Wales to James II's second wife on 10 June 1688, however, provided the immediate cue for action. So they were worried that this son would become king. A group of 7 Whig and Tory politicians sent William a signed invitation to come to England's rescue. William, using the rumor that the baby was not really the Queen's, but had been smuggled into the bedchamber in a warming pan as a pretext, alleged that James therefore was guilty of trying to defraud William and his wife of their inheritance rights. The Glorious Revolution of 1688 and 1689 that followed resulted in the overthrow of James II and the installment of William and Mary as the joint sovereigns of England. Remember, this is the only time we've had a joint sovereign king and queen. Scotland, Ireland, though with full regal power invested in William alone. So William had the regal power, but they were both king and queen. History annotation: in response to the policies that threatened to restore Catholicism in England, Parliament deposed King James II and called William of Orange from the Dutch Republic and his wife Mary, who was James's Protestant daughter, to replace him. William and Mary agreed to the Bill of Rights presented to them by Parliament, and this is what we're going to go over, thereby acknowledging that their power came from the legislature rather than from any concept of the divine right of kings. So remember, starting out in the 1100s, the king had a divine right to rule, but the people had a divine right to liberty. And that trumped the divine right to rule. So now as this starts to develop and we get to 1689, they realize that the executive, the king, doesn't get his power divinely, but gets his power by consent of the people through legislature. Novel concept, right? In 1689. The Bill of Rights confirmed traditional English liberties, especially the power of Parliament to make laws and consent to taxation. It also confirmed and guaranteed freedom of speech and denied the legitimacy of cruel and unusual punishments. Does this sound familiar? The Bill of Rights quickly took its place as a foundation of English constitutionalism and exercised great influence in the British North American colonies during their war for independence. So this is how it starts. Whereas the Lords spiritual and temporal and commons assembled at Westminster, lawfully, fully, and freely representing all the estates of the people of this realm, did, upon the 13th day of February, in the year of our Lord, 1688, present unto their majesties, then called and known by the names and style of William and Mary, Prince and Princess of Orange, being present in their proper persons, a certain declaration in writing, made by the said Lords and Commons in the words following. Whereas the late King James II, by the assistance of diverse evil counselors, judges, and ministers employed by him, did endeavor to subvert and extirpate the Protestant religion and the laws and liberties of this kingdom, 1, by assuming and exercising a power of dispensing with and suspending of laws and the execution of laws without consent of Parliament, by committing and prosecuting divers worthy prelates for humbly petitioning to be excused for, that's supposed to be from, concurring to the same assumed power. By 3, by issuing and causing to be executed a commission under the Great Seal for erecting a court called the Court of Commissioners for ecclesiastical causes. 4, by levying money for and to the use of the crown by pretense of prerogative for other time and in other manner than the same was granted by Parliament. So remember, only Parliament could raise the taxes. 5, by raising and keeping a standing army within this kingdom in time of peace without consent of Parliament and quartering soldiers contrary to the law. Now this becomes a big argument also within the Federalist Papers during the time of our Constitution. 6, by causing several good subjects, being Protestants, to be disarmed at the same time when Papists were both armed and employed contrary to law. So again, our Second Amendment takes a look at this where you cannot allow some people to be armed and some people not to be armed. I wish our current Congress today knew that. 7, by violating the freedom of election of members to serve in Parliament. 8, by prosecutions in the Court of King's Bench for matters and causes cognizable only in Parliament, and by divers other arbitrary and illegal courses. 9, and whereas of late years, partial, corrupt, and unqualified persons have been returned and served on juries and trials. What's an unqualified person in a jury or a trial? Because remember, under the Magna Carta 1215, it said that a person had to be tried by a jury of their peers, whereas the noble had to be judged by the noble and the commons had to be judged by the commons. Corrupt and unqualified persons have been returned and served on juries in trials, and particularly divers jurors in trials for high treason, which were not freeholders. 10, an excessive bail hath been required of persons committed in criminal cases to elude the benefit of the laws made by the liberty of the subjects. 11, and excessive fines have been imposed. Does any of this sound familiar to our Bill of Rights? 12, and illegal and cruel punishments inflicted. 13, and several grants and promises made of fines and forfeitures before any conviction or judgment against the persons upon whom the same were to be levied. no due process.
Were grants different then too?
Yes, yeah, grants were different then. All which are utterly and directly contrary to the known laws and statutes and freedom of this realm. And whereas the said late King James II, having abdicated the government and the throne being thereby vacant, His Highness the Prince of Orange, whom it hath pleased Almighty God to make the glorious instrument of delivering this kingdom from popery and arbitrary power, did, by the advice of the Lords spiritual and temporal, and the divers principal persons of the commons, cause letters to be written to the Lords spiritual and temporal, being Protestants, and other letters to the several counties, cities, universities, boroughs, and cinque ports, for the choosing of such persons to represent them as were of right to be sent to Parliament to meet and sit at Westminster upon the 22nd day of January in this year 1688, in order to such an establishment as that their religion, laws, and liberties might not again be in danger of being subverted, upon which letters elections have been accordingly made. And thereupon the said Lords spiritual and temporal and commons, pursuant to their respective letters and elections, being now assembled in a full and free representation of this nation, taking into their most serious consideration the best means for attaining the ends aforesaid, do in the first place, as their ancestors in like case have usually done, for the vindicating and asserting their ancient rights and liberties, declare, 1, that the pretended power of suspending of laws or the execution of laws by regal authority without consent of Parliament is illegal. 2, that the pretended power of dispensing with laws or the execution of laws by regal authority as it hath been assumed and exercised of late is illegal. Everybody remember 2020?
Yep.
So what would regal authority have been during 2020? The executive power, right? And we knew then that the executive can't create law, and it's illegal. If only our elected officials would have realized that in 2020, huh? Amazing. 3, that the commission for erecting the late court of commissioners for ecclesiastical causes and all other commissions and courts of like nature are illegal and pernicious. 4, that levying money for or to the use of the crown by pretense of prerogative without grant of Parliament for longer time or in other manner than the same is or shall be granted is illegal. What are they talking about there? Darnell's case, the five Knights case, when the king couldn't raise the money because Parliament wouldn't raise taxes, so he just took their wealth and called it a forced loan. They're calling it out. It's illegal. That it is the right of the subjects to petition the king, and all commitments and prosecutions for such petitioning are illegal. 6, that the raising of or keeping a standing army within the kingdom in time of peace, unless it be with consent of Parliament, is against law. This is why our Second Amendment says a well-regulated militia being necessary to a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Because there was an argument about whether we should have a standing army. Because it's always been the history that executives have shallow skin and they will start a war over the drop of a hat, Mr. Bush. And if they've got a standing army, that army has to invade or fight or be in use for us to be able to afford to feed them and keep them. And so this became quite a big debate during the Federalist Papers. See, it's just during the 20th century that we decided that we should be the world police force and that we should violate the Declaration of Independence by deciding what government each continent should have, and that we're the deciding factor of that. That violates our founding documents. 7, that the subjects which are Protestants may have arms for their defense suitable to their conditions and as allowed by law. 8, that election of members of Parliament ought to be free. I guess we lost sight of that in 2020 as well. 9, that the freedom of speech and debates or proceedings in Parliament ought not be impeached or questioned in any court or place out of Parliament. Do we have a problem with the First Amendment today? Yeah, we certainly do, especially since Elon Musk has opened up all the Twitter files and we find out that there was 80 FBI agents sitting there doing the bidding of people in government to restrict free speech. Now, a private company can restrict your free speech all day long. They haven't violated the law because the individual cannot restrict your right. The Bill of Rights are the thou shalt nots to government. Government is not allowed to restrict your speech in the public venue. And that's exactly what happened. Ten, that the excessive bail ought not be required, nor excessive fines imposed, nor cruel and unusual punishments inflicted. I guess all the people being held under the Patriot Act, that doesn't apply to. See, we knew that that was evil and oppressive then. I guess not so much today. 11, that jurors ought to be duly impaneled and returned, and jurors which pass upon men in trials for high treason ought to be freeholders. 12, that all grants and promises of fines and forfeitures of particular persons before conviction are illegal and void. Anybody ever read what these red flag laws are all about? You think that comes directly contrary to that particular sentence? That all grants and promises of fines or forfeitures of particular persons before conviction are illegal and void. What about civil asset forfeiture? Where we get to take your stuff and then you have to go to court and prove your innocence to have it back. Does that kind of go in the face of that? Yeah, our founding fathers, that sound you hear at night is them twisting in their graves. 13, and that for redress of all grievances and for the amending, strengthening, and preserving of laws, Parliament ought to be held frequently. In our Constitution, they have to meet at least once a year. In 1861, that didn't happen. They'd gone past their year, and that's where Lincoln decided to write an executive order ordering only the northern representatives back to session. It was illegal. 1. A.B. Do sincerely promise and swear that I will be faithfully and bear true allegiance to their Majesties King William and Queen Mary, so help me God. What does this sound like? This sounds like the oath that we have in Article 6, Section 1, Clause 3 of the Constitution. I, A.B., do swear that I do from my heart abhor, detest, and abjure as impious and heretical the damnable doctrine and position that princes excommunicated or deprived by the Pope or any authority of the see or Rome may be deposed or murdered by their subjects or any other whatsoever, and I do declare that no foreign prince, person, prelate, state, or potentate hath or ought to have any jurisdiction, power, superiority, preeminence, or authority, ecclesiastical or spiritual, within this realm, so help me God. They really did not like the Pope in Rome. Four, upon which their said majesties did accept the crown and royal dignity of the kingdoms of England, France, and Ireland, and the dominions thereunto belonging, according to the resolution and desire of the said lords and commons contained in the said declaration. 5, and thereupon their majesties were pleased that the said Lords Spiritual and Temporal and Commons, being the two houses of Parliament, should continue to set, and with their Majesties' royal concurrence, make effectual provision for the settlement of the religion, laws, and liberties of this kingdom, so that the same for the future might not be in danger again of being subverted, to which the said Lords Spiritual and Temporal and Commons did agree and proceed to act accordingly. 6. Now, in pursuance of the premises, the said Lords Spiritual and Temporal and Commons in Parliament assembled for the ratifying, confirming, and establishing the said declaration and the articles, clauses, matters, and things therein contained, by the force of law, made in due form by authority of Parliament, do pray that it may be declared and enacted, that all and singular the rights and liberties asserted and claimed in the said declaration are the true, ancient, and indubitable rights and liberties of the people of this kingdom, and so shall be esteemed, allowed, adjudged, deemed, and taken to be, and that all and every the particulars aforesaid shall be firmly and strictly holden and observed, as they are expressed in the said declaration, and all officers and ministers whatsoever shall serve their Majesties and their successors according to the same in all times to come. A lot of words that says, don't break that. 7. And the said Lords, Spiritual and Temporal, and Commons, seriously considering how it hath pleased Almighty God in his marvelous providence and merciful goodness to this nation to provide and preserve their said Majesties' royal persons most happily to reign over us upon the throne of their ancestors, for which they render unto him from the bottom of their hearts their humblest thanks and praises, do truly, firmly, assuredly, and in the sincerity of their hearts think and do hereby recognize, acknowledge, and declare that King James II, having abdicated the government, and their Majesties having accepted the crown and royal dignity aforesaid, their said Majesties did become, were, are, and of right ought to be, by the laws of this realm, our sovereign liege, Lord and Lady, King and Queen of England, France, and Ireland, and the dominions thereunto belonging, and into whose princely persons the royal state, crown, and dignity of the same realms, with all honors, styles, titles, regalities, prerogatives, powers, jurisdictions, and authorities to the same belonging and appertaining, are most fully, rightfully, and entirely invested and incorporated, united, and annexed. 8. And for preventing all questions and divisions in this realm by reason of any pretended titles to the crown, and for preserving a certainty in the succession thereof, in and upon which the unity, peace, tranquility, and safety, unity, peace, tranquility, does that sound familiar in the Constitution? Okay. And safety of this nation doth under God wholly consist and depend, the said Lords Spiritual and Temporal and Commons do beseech their Majesties, that it may be enacted, established, and declared, that the crown and regal government of the said kingdoms and dominions, with all and singular the premises thereunto belonging and appertaining, shall be and continue to their said Majesties and the survivor of them during their lives and the life of the survivor of them, and that the entire, perfect, and full exercise of the regal power and government be only in and executed by His Majesty in the names of both their Majesties during their joint lives, and after their deceases, the said crown and premises shall be and remain to the heirs of the body of Her Majesty, and for default of such issue to Her Royal Highness the Princess Anne of Denmark, and the heirs of her body, and for default of such issue to the heirs of the body of his said Majesty, and thereunto the said Lords Spiritual and Temporal and Commons do in the name of all the people aforesaid, most humbly and faithfully submit themselves, their heirs and their posterities forever, and do faithfully promise that they will stand to maintain and defend their said majesties, and also the limitations and succession of the crown herein specified and contained to the utmost of their powers, with their lives and estates, against all persons whatsoever that shall attempt anything to the contrary. So in this chapter, they actually set an absolute